Hello, my name is fguadagno. We are again in Bullshit Social Sciences, and I have to say that it is more than a pleasure for me to be with Johan Norberg, one of the key figures in the current intellectual world. Yes, a successful author and historian of ideas, and most of all, he is here to talk about one of the essential topics in history, the Russian Revolution, but not focused on straight facts. No, he's going to focus rather in ideas that led to a catastrophe. And the ideas are from Lenin and Trotsky. But first of all, how are you, Johan?
Thank you. I am well. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this important topic. How are you?
I am more than fine. Like I told you before, you are a trademark for the intellectual war. So this is more than an honor. And I would like to start with something that it's kind of ridiculous that we have to even discuss it. But the Russian Revolution happened in three stages: 1905, 1917 with Kerensky, and Lenin did a coup d'état. So why do you think that it is understood that Lenin led a revolution and not a coup d'état? I'm going to do the distinction again. It is broadly understood that this is a revolution against the Tsar, for example, but it wasn't. It was a coup d'état against Kerensky.
Yeah, that's a great place to start, and that's a great question, because this explains some of the problems with the communist ideals, how they try to fit the world and fit history into their own otherworldly theories. Why do we think of Lenin's coup d'etat as a revolution? Well, because it had to be one, according to Marxist ideology. According to Karl Marx, a collective uprising of some sort was inevitable when the proletariat became conscious of their exploitation. But it was, of course, nothing of the sort. As you point out, the real revolution had been taking place in two steps: more of a constitutional parliament in place, and then the revolution in February of 1917, with Kerensky starting to build a democratic and a more centrist government. Then Lenin and Trotsky and the others, they wanted to make a coup against this, to destroy this beginning of a democratic government. They tried to struggle with this all through 1917, but they were held back by the fact that they knew that they had very little support among the people, probably just something like 10,000 members of the Bolshevik party in a country of 150 million people. So
this is something that I want to point out. The Mensheviks were actually more popular, or had even more background or support that the Bolsheviks, that were a minority in this field.
Yeah, exactly. So the Bolsheviks and Lenin was not even a majority of the revolutionary socialists. So the only reason why they could take power in October was that they were more well-armed and more well-organized than others, and they were more ruthless. So they could move into positions pretending that they were defending the February Revolution against foreign invaders, or a Tsarist counter-revolution or something like that. And then the provisional government under Kerensky was very reluctant to call in the military against him, because he feared more a conservative Tsarist coup more than a Bolshevik coup. So Lenin could use this confusion to move in, and he even removed words like "long live socialism" from the drafts, because he knew that he had to hide his real motives, because he didn't have support. So they basically just moved in and sat down while other soldiers moved out, and only afterwards did they say that they had made a coup, or, well, a revolution, and started shooting those who resisted them. And of course, this history was not good enough for the historical materialists, so they had to invent and retrofit events to fit Marxist theories with an incredible propaganda machine. And one particularly influential one was Eisenstein's movie October, which was done 10 years after the events of 1917, which showed this sort of millions of workers storming the Winter Palace. And this was absolute nonsense. In fact, more people were wounded during the filming of the storming of the Winter Palace than during the so-called storming of the Winter Palace.
And of course, this was a revolution that was, I would say, in peace, but it was basically fast. It was a fast revolution. It didn't take so much. But one of the people that was behind was Leon Trotsky, and he is recognized today as an artist, as a sensitive person, when he was willing to annihilate the so-called counter-revolutionary forces. And I want to say that Leon Trotsky, as People Commissar for Military and Naval Affairs and leader of the Red Army, had a significant influence during the period of war communism. This is the annihilation of more than 2, 3, or thousands of people. So how this romanticization, idealization can be explained?
Yeah, there's a simple reason. We intellectuals are so simple. We love intellectuals. And Trotsky, he looked the part, and he spoke French and German, and he read books, and he wrote lots of books. So it's easy to make excuses for such a person. But the problem is, of course, that and dream about what would have happened had he been in power. But of course, we know that because he as you refer to, he was there. He waged revolutionary war on the opponents and on the innocent as well. He was the kind of intellectual who wanted to force the world to obey his will and his theories. And he really had blood on his hands. He was absolutely explicit about it. In his book, Terrorism and Communism, he wrote a justification for terrorism, for red terror, saying that who aims at the end cannot reject the means. And the means was to kill ruthlessly, and even to choose random soldiers to execute them if he felt like they were too cowardly in battle or anything like that. And I mean, yes, an intellectual, but he was the intellectual who implemented a return to slavery in Russia, calling it the militarization of labor, destroying the trade unions, banning strikes, saying that people who left the job, they were deserters. And what do you do with deserters? You shoot them or you put them into concentration camps. So I think it's incredibly important for those intellectuals today who admire Trotsky, they should know that they would probably be the first one who would be enslaved and killed by a Trotskyite system. Just like, ironically, of course, Trotsky was when he lost the internal power struggle in the Communist Party.
Yes, but maybe the thing about this is that Trotsky was annihilated by Stalin, and that like romanticizes the legacy of someone who could make things different. And we have to remember that he was part of an artistical movement led by Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and all of that. So that is something else that romanticized the idea of mass killer, basically.
That's right. He lost the power struggle, so people could dream about what would have happened had he been in charge of Moscow instead of Stalin. Then it's easy to romanticize. It's all fictional socialism is the easiest thing on the planet because you can just pretend that you'd fix every problem and people would just obey voluntarily and you didn't have to resort to concentration camps and mass murder. But we know that Trotsky did this while he was still in Petrograd and in Moscow. This is exactly what he did. He reimposed slavery in Russia and he killed ruthlessly anyone who looked like he could be an enemy.
Yeah, those are the counter revolutionaries. But there's something else, and it's like an analogy that is basically done. That is, what is the relationship that you find regarding the French Revolution with the Russian revolution? Because they are in the end both dictatorships, and both are led with the power of reason with a capital R, if you know what I mean.
Yes, that's right. And there are many similarities, and often similarities that were mentioned explicitly by revolutionaries like Lenin and Trotsky, who looked to Robespierre and the Jacobins and trying to both see them as ideals and also to learn lessons. And in both cases, of course, there was first liberal constitutional revolutions against the old regime. In France in 1789, in Russia in two steps, 1905 and then February 1917, and then the totalitarians, the Jacobins in France and the Bolsheviks in Russia, tried to undermine this constitutional government in every way they could, and eventually managed to take over with very ruthless means, dismantling all the constitutions, all the individual rights in the system. The Jacobins managed to take power in 1792-93, and the Bolsheviks in October 1917. And Lenin and Trotsky, again, they made this relationship explicit and talked a lot about it, the Red Terror, which they used as, Lenin and Trotsky talked about it as a good thing, Red Terror against the bourgeoisie. They modeled this on Robespierre. They said, this is the way to protect this system. And Trotsky said explicitly that with this system, we are now we're planning the system from the beginning. We have to root out all the enemies because we are starting anew from the top with our plan. Then it's not enough with a prison or prisons everywhere. We need guillotines, just like the French revolutionaries, and we have to chop off the heads of the defenders of the old system to create the new.
What are the main issues of creating a society from a society from scratch? What are the main issues, like changing the calendar, like in the French Revolution? Well, even the war communism had like a brand new, like a state of trying to relate with society in a different way. So the war communism was communism in its pure form. So what do you think are the main issues of creating a new society from scratch?
Yeah, this is always a crazy plan, because what you do is that if you're starting from scratch, it means that you're destroying old wisdom, old communities, old institutions, things that have emerged over centuries from millions and millions of people and generations, and they're received wisdom from experiments, tests, trial and error, with the preferences of a few people at the top. And what they often do then is that both the Jacobins in France and the Bolsheviks in Russia is that they removed all kinds of institutions that could impose some sort of moderation or checks and balances on their will, on their plans. And this could be anything from economic decentralization, independent farmers, businesses, churches, families, communities. Everything has to be controlled, because you're starting from the beginning, from the top. Then everything has to go, and you remove it with the plans that you have received from Karl Marx. And this is what Hayek calls the fatal conceit, the idea that someone can understand the whole of society and improve it from the top down. The only thing that happens is that you lose all the knowledge that only exists in individual minds out there in society, and is only revealed through people's actions and what emerges, the price system and how society and culture evolves. If you throw that out, well, fairly soon you begin to starve, which the communists realized. They didn't even know how to produce food when they tried to force the farmers to just hand over food, when they imposed prices from the top down in the factories that they had taken over. The whole economy collapsed. But even worse than that, you also lose all the human dignity, all the respect for individual dignity and rights, because everyone in society are just like pieces on your chessboard to be pushed around by this person who starts society from anew, pushed around or sacrificed if that's what you need to do to create utopia for everyone.
Well, actually, because Lenin had the perfect consciousness that he was like an elite of the proletariat, and he had to live for the party. I mean, it wasn't right to Lenin to work or Trotsky to work or to do something else. No, they had to live for the party. And this is like a very arrogant and elitist view. And this is still of how some of the extreme left parties conceive themselves. So how do you evaluate these ideas that seem kind of like a novelty by those times?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is important, I think, to understand what happened during the Bolshevik coup d'etat, that, when Lenin returned to Russia, sent there by the Germans to undermine Russia during the First World War, and he gave his first speeches, not just other socialists, but other Bolsheviks also thought that, my God, he's crazy. He's far too radical. He wants to sort of throw everything out, nationalize everything, and not caring at all about where the workers are or the farmers are, and so on. Because Lenin had planned it all from reading Marx and from his desk. Other Marxists were often more pragmatic, but Lenin and Trotsky, in a way, they were the most important two individuals for the revolution and the two most dangerous people, because they were not willing to wait for society and for people to show what they wanted and needed, because they were seduced by their own theories and their own oratory. Lenin famously did not visit the countryside, didn't visit factories and farms. He loved humanity, but he just didn't like individual human beings, and he didn't care much about them because it was all in his plan. Trotsky did visit other places, but mostly to just give a brief speech and love his own oratory and then move on. And the problem, of course, is that these sort of professional revolutionaries who have developed their ideas from ivory towers is that they create these beautiful theories at their desks about how society should be, what human beings should be like. And what do you do then when people don't live up to your theories? What do you do? Well, you begin to think that people are the problem. And that's when you need to start the secret police. You have to implement red terror. You need torture, and you need to militarize the workforce, and all those workers whom you said that you did the revolution in their name, you enslave them. You shoot them if they're trying to leave the factory for another kind of job, because they don't fit your theories.
And there's almost like this thought that Lenin, who died in 1924 with due to severe mental illness caused by a stroke, but that he if he will be under power instead of Stalin, it wouldn't happen the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocide. But this is like, for me, that's some kind of mistake, because the expropriations happened with Lenin as well. So do you think that the Ukrainian genocide was a consequence of Lenin and of course a combination with Stalin?
Yes, absolutely. I'm certain of it. This horrible plan of basically genocide by starvation was something that evolved naturally from Lenin's and Trotsky's plan for several reasons. They were trying to run an economy without private property, businesses, and markets. So you had to take what you needed, and you tried to run a state without human rights, dignity of the individual. You had replaced consent with guns. You had justified terrorism and genocide based on class. If you belong, it's not your actions, it's that you belong to the wrong group, you have the wrong parents, you have the wrong education, then your fate is already sealed. All of this prepared the ground for a Holodomor. And in fact, the great supporter of attacking the farmers, who constantly argued that they had to enforce collectivization to basically remove the independent farmers as a class and just take the food, was Trotsky, the sort of sensitive artist and intellectual. He was the one who said, the farmers have us by the throat, we have to push back and destroy them. And then, naturally, if you do that, you need violence. And even after falling out with Stalin and having gone into exile, Trotsky said that Stalin does the right thing by collectivizing agriculture and destroying the farmer class. He was not afraid of Stalin not being too ruthless. He was afraid that Stalin was too weak and would compromise too much. He was afraid that Bukharin would return, who was sort of more of a moderate and might leave the farmers alone. So I would say that Lenin and Trotsky gave Stalin the ideas, they gave him the justification, they gave him the guns, and Stalin just pulled the trigger.
So by closing this dialogue, I would like to point out something like 100 years passed since Lenin died, and I would like from you a reflection of this ideas, this romanticization of Lenin and Trotsky to the catastrophe that led, how we can try to evade this trap that is kind of curious, because if you ask someone about Hitler, and I'm going to be extreme here, if you ask someone about Hitler or Mussolini, they will be in shock horror. But Lenin and Trotsky, oh yeah, they are cool. They are yeah cool. That would be the term. So to avoid that intellectual trap, what would you recommend?
Yes, this is the strange thing, that lots of people think that Lenin and Trotsky, and sometimes even Stalin, yes, they tortured and killed millions, but they did it for good ends. They at least were had the moral high ground when they did it. So perhaps they are not as awful as Hitler and other mass murderers. But this is what I think the most important lesson of the Soviet Union, that we have to give that up. The idea that the ends can ever in any way apologize the means, because this is the mindset that excuses dictatorships and atrocities. Because, you know, Lenin and Trotsky, they defended terrorism, they defended the Red Terror and the secret police and torture and genocide based on class, background, and education. They even sort of tried to spur individual soldiers and the secret police to terror by talking about the enemies as sort of inferior, as animals, harmful insects, lice, and bloodsuckers who should drown in their own blood. And this, I think, is the key. Does this mean that they were bloodthirsty? I'm not sure. I don't think this necessarily comes from sort of any kind of individual sadism on their part. In fact, one of the scariest things that have been said about Lenin by one of his associates was that Lenin killed without scruples, but also without enthusiasm. So it wasn't that he liked it, he just knew that millions had to die for his ideals. And in a way, to me, this is more dangerous than sadism, because such people, they know that they are right. They know that they have history on their side. And they just don't just want to sort of satisfy their own individual sadism and bloodthirst, which actually at some point might be sated among a criminal. But instead, they implement systems that make it possible to continue these kinds of atrocities over and over again. Create systems that can kill 1,000,000 times over. And that's the gift that Lenin and Trotsky handed over to Stalin, such a system, because they just knew that they were right and that individuals had to be sacrificed. And that's what we must learn. Individuals and human rights must never, ever be sacrificed for any kind of ideal, because in that case, we always end up there in the graveyards.
So that is more than an interesting reflection, and thank you so much for your time, Johan, because I know that you have a hectic schedule. I know that you have a new book on draft, and that is time consuming. So your latest book, the Capitalist Manifesto, I highly recommend the reading. So I'm sure that the new book will be a success. So thank you so much, and I wish you the best for your new book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for interesting conversation about a depressing subject.
Thank you so much. Well, my name is Facundo Guadagno. Soy Facundo Guadagno. Esto fue otro episodio de Social Sciences. Pueden colaborar a través de Cafecito o Patreon para mejor y más contenido.